Hi, this is the fellow passenger. Today we're going to talk about FM synthesis again. And the reason for that is that a few people have reached out to me saying that, well, it's one thing of understanding what FM synthesis is, but it's a completely different story if you want to use it to design sounds. And yes, that's true. And I'm going to show you some just little basic techniques you can use to create different types of sounds using FM. And hopefully that will be a little bit of a starting point for you if you're just starting out. I'm going to use Operator to demonstrate this, but feel free to use whatever FM synth you want. What we're going to start with is I am just going to use Pro Q3 for demo purposes. Now, before we are actually FMing anything, so when you open the operator, it is just using the first operator in operator. It sounds very meta, but it's just a pure sine wave. And as you can see here, you just get one fundamental frequency. The important thing to think about when you are creating FM sounds is where are the transients in the sound that you want to make? Because FM synthesis it's just about adding harmonics rather than cutting harmonics out, like a lot of analog synths and stuff like that. So if we just look at the scope here, I'm just pressing the C key. And if I start using this operator to modulate the carrier, so the modulator, you will see how it will introduce more harmonics in here. If I add another one, we're going to look at doing a few bunch of different sounds using this technique. So we'll look at some pads, bass, and some percussion sounds. So if we start with a pad, let's just start with the first operator here. And I'm just going to make a very generic pad. I just make an envelope that looks a bit like this. Oh no, sorry, let's start again. I'll just take a clean one so we don't get confused. And then we just use the first operator here. And then we do that. It's almost quite sort of bell-like. Maybe we should make that a bit longer. By default, the envelope looks like this. So if we introduce the second oscillator, you can see how that's going to taper off quite quickly. So if we just choose to, can we do this? How do we do this? Copy from oscillator, so 2B. We want to copy from oscillator A. I find that a lot of pads seems to have their frequencies hovering around the lower mids, obviously depending on where you play them on the keyboard. But the power of FM synthesis, though, is that each of the different operators have their own envelope, and that can make for a very animated sound. So if we just want we make the attack longer on the second one, we will be able to hear how the harmonic starts creeping in. Maybe that's a bit too long. Awful chord. And this is going to become more pronounced if we make the actual initial pad, the modulator, we can make that really snappy. So there you see we can start making some nice pad sounds. And the sine wave, which is very much the traditional basic waveform used in FM synthesis, like on the old DX7, etc. Operator, and also a lot of hardware FM synths now, offers other waveforms. The basic sine wave, I understand where they're coming from, because it starts off with just the fundamental frequency, and then as you add in more, it will add more harmonics in there. And that happens really quickly. So if you use a waveform that is more harmonically rich already to start with, you are just going to get overloaded with a lot of transients very quickly. But it can actually be quite a good thing if you're just peppering it quite carefully. So if we do the original modulator, the carrier operator, we can just change that to saw wave. And we can also change this one to another type of saw wave. The more you start animating, and especially animating the envelopes and do interesting things with them, you can create quite complex, harmonically complex sounds. You can obviously map these to LFOs and things like that, but one interesting thing is to perhaps use the shaper MIDI, which comes in under the MIDI effects here, which is sort of a nice little envelope Max for Live device. So if we connect that to, by default, it's just drooping down like that. Let's just set the original envelope to that. But we can create lots of other different shapes. So one thing that also happens if you want to go down into the lower register and get more bassy sounds, you may need to drop the transpose down, because the more you add more harmonics into it, the more it will stop feeling bassy, and it will be predominantly something that is higher up on the keyboard. But this one also has this random effect. And just think now, we have only used actually 2 operators, and if you start introducing more operators, it's obviously going to add more harmonics, and the less bassy it's going to feel. So if we have 2 of these, let's randomize that a bit, and then we attach that to the second one. Let's just let's stitch those. And another thing that we're going to look at, so we got our is the pitch control here, and it will be the relationship between the modulator and the carrier's relationship. So if we just set these back to sine waves to just reduce the number of harmonics we get. So we've got, and as we turn the tuning of the modulator up, you're going to get the harmonics moving up. Also fun to sort of, can be fun if you want to make sort of some atonal stuff. The operator comes with a filter, which is great. It's one feature that a lot of FM synths are lacking, especially the vintage ones. So if I use them, I tend to use some sort of EQ or filtering, just to, because the harmonics add up rather quickly and you get really harsh and sharp sounds. Okay, I think we've looked enough at pads. Let's look at bass sounds. I'm just going to give you You can obviously experiment a lot yourself, but I'm just going to give you some indication so you can end up in a bass spectrum quite quickly. So now we just got our basic carrier, and if we just introduce a little bit of FM into this, I'm playing further down on the keyboard, so therefore we're already getting a bass sound. So I think to stay in a bass territory, if I just set this back to, that's the middle C, so if we just want to be in bass territory, let's pitch that down. Be careful, because that's still a bass, but this is more bassy, and you can create harmonically interesting basses if you change the tuning a bit, but stay maybe around up to 4 semitones. You can obviously try to push that further, but all of a sudden that's a classic UK bass, because it stops feeling like a bass when you go further up. And you can play around with different waveforms here to play around with some classic FM bass sounds. And if you want to, just be careful with the other operators, because you're quite quickly going to add up. Classic FM bass sounds. And you can also use this shaper to great effect. Let's just see. Maybe not that. We do the second operator, we turn that off. You can try some different waveforms. So you can create quite harmonic rich things. I tend to usually stick to 2 operators and then keep the chorus quite low, and then depending on how growly your bass you want, you just turn the level up. Let's start a look at some percussion. We just open a new operator. So if we just make a default kick sound before we make any FM, let's just set an envelope, and then we enable the pitch envelope as well. Okay, we got a sort of a 909-like kick, but we haven't done any FM yet. And now again, it's important to think about, like, where do the transients sit, or where are the harmonics? So a kick tends to have something happening at the beginning which creates the punch, and then it's got a little bit more of a bassy tail sometimes. Like an 808 is a perfect example of that. But you tend to have the transients at the beginning. So if you want to make a kick that sounds punchier than this one, you can introduce more, you can do some FM. That's sort of drifting outside of kick territory, because you just want the transient perhaps right at the beginning. So you can hear that's got more punch to it. If we turn that off, sounds like that. Can add a little bit of FM transient, and you can try different waveforms here. So you can make some nice, unique kicks that are quite punchy and unique to you. But just if you just think about those things, like where does the transient sit? Because if we make this envelope longer, it doesn't sound like a kick anymore. Then we can easily transition this into a snare as well. So if we just transpose that up to start with, and we make that a bit shorter. So a snare often tends to have a bit of a noise element to it. And we have so far only used this standard algorithm, which means that this one is the main operator or oscillator down here. And they will cascade down. So this one will affect the next, which will affect the next, which will affect the next, creating harmonically absolutely nuts things if you're using all of them. But the one at the bottom, here's the yellow one, is the one that is actually sent out to your speakers. So if we look at these ones, here, this cube here will mean that the B will affect A, and A is connected to the output, but also that the orange one, or D, will affect C, and C is connected to the output. So C is not affecting the two bottom ones. So if we choose that one instead, these two will actually play next to one another rather than affecting one another. So if we set this one to noise, we are going to start to get some probably want to pitch. It's too low. And there we are in some sort of 909 type snare territory. Nice little trick. The last one, which is arguably the most harmonic rich one, is going to be a hi-hat. And we are not going to use noise for this. I think the TR-606 drum machine is using a frequency modulation, analog frequency modulation using square waves. But basically, we need a way of creating noise. And therefore, we need to create a bit of chaos. If you can set here at the moment, these are set to track the keyboard, but if you set to fixed, doesn't matter which key I'm pressing, it's going to play this particular frequency, which is 100 Hertz. We're going to use sine waves. You can set these to square waves and you get a very metallic sounding, more metallic sounding hi-hat, which is also nice. We can try that, but you basically need these to be fixed, but you need frequencies that are not in a nice harmonic relation with one another to create a bit of noise. And you can either use an EQ, or let's use the filter in this case and do a bit of high pass. And there we got a hi-hat. And if we swap these out to square waves instead, you can create symbols and all sorts. I hope you found that helpful. Also, if you are on the hunt for a decent FM synth and you don't have one, I've seen that on Plugin Boutique. I'm not sponsored, I just want to mention. I'm not sponsored by this, but I spotted yesterday that FM8, which is a really powerful VST FM synth, is currently only 10 quid, so might be worth considering. There's also so many good vintage FM synths that are really cheap as well. If you just start looking at what they are and not just hone in on the DX7s and things like that, you can get them for about 150 quid at the moment, a lot of them. So I hope you found that interesting and hope to see you in the next episode. Thank you.